Hello, my name is Jaden and I'm a digital artist and educator. If you're new to my channel, I give advice on how to pursue a career path in the animation industry. So if you'd like to stick around for more tips, hit that subscribe button and turn on your bell notifications. Now on with today's video. I'd like to welcome our second guest on the interview series with our animation industry professionals. Today we have Nathan joining us, and at the time of recording this video, he's currently at Nickelodeon as a board artist, and he's going to share some insight of what it's like to do storyboarding in animation. Let's kick it off with an introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what got you interested in storyboarding, and how did you get into the industry?
My name is Nathan. I'm from Seattle area originally. I grew up in actually Renton, Washington, which is the headquarters of Boeing, the airplane manufacturers. And most everybody I knew, their parents worked for Boeing. My dad moved there because he worked for Boeing as an aerospace engineer. So when I was growing up, I really did not know anybody who was like working in animation or even working as a professional artist, really in any context other than like as a teacher. My passion growing up really was music. I still play music all the time. So I had a band that started when I was in like middle school. You know, what was really awesome about music, I think, especially at that time in my life, was it was very social. It was like an art that I could do with other people. That became the basis of like my friend group. Every once in a while we'd get a show and they'd be like, be sure to tell all your friends about the show. And I'd be like, all my friends are in the band. But basically that kind of led into where I am now, because I did all these art projects that were like for the band, like t-shirts, show posters, album art. And then those projects became increasingly more elaborate, especially as like band members started to move away and go to college. And, you know, we were doing this for like years and years, of course, to where I started to do things that were more on my own, right? So I was like, well, I can't do the music with my band right now. So I'm going to put a lot of effort into the album art. So I'm going to make an 80-page comic book that's actually the album art for the new album that we're making, you know? That's sort of what led me to say, okay, maybe I should pursue visual art over like music as like a career trajectory. The other thing that kind of helped me make that decision, there were a couple of things. There was around the end of high school, I met a couple of guys through the church that my family went to who worked in video games. They were like video game concept artists working at like Valve, and one of them worked on Halo. They were like really top tier artists, like next level guys. But that kind of was something where I was like, okay, that's actually something, not that I could do what they do, because I still could not do that, but pursuing visual art seemed like a viable career path. The other thing that was cool is I got connected online with one of my favorite storyboard artists and comic artists, this guy, Jesse Moynihan. He worked on Adventure Time. He has a really awesome comic online called Forming that's like hand painted. When we look back and we see these illuminated manuscripts from like medieval times, and you're like, that's a labor of love. That's what his work is like. So it's really, really inspiring to me. He was pretty encouraging to me about like, I would send him like my comics and things like that, and he would give me really nice feedback. So when I was in college, I was pursuing a double major in painting and creative writing because my school didn't have an animation program. There were some animation classes, but they were like kind of CG oriented, and I kind of knew I wanted to go into like 2D, like stuff where I would be drawing, you know, and stuff where I would have more creative input than like a CG animator typically does. That was my reasoning at the time. I don't know if people have different experiences than that. To me, that combination of creative writing and like fine art painting sort of added up to like animation, storytelling, storyboarding, like that kind of trajectory I wanted to go down. And I knew, because I didn't have like a lot of connections in the industry, that I would really need to put a ton of effort into like finding those connections and networking, and those are things that don't come naturally to me. I'm very much the stereotype of the artist that like I love to like work on something alone in secret and then like put it out online and never tell anyone about it, and then be sad that nobody likes it, and then I move on with my life. But I'm being dramatic because like I'm grateful for the people who have shown a lot of appreciation for my art. I'm happy how things have gone in my life, but that's naturally like my attitude. I was like, okay, I need to apply for internships while I'm in school, and I applied for over 30 different internships. I was very, very systematic. I just found like every animation studio I could, every game studio. And I really wanted to work in like TV animation. I was really lucky because I didn't hear back from anybody, except I got one interview, and it happened to be at Nickelodeon Animation. So I was really fortunate that that ended up working out. I interned there during like my last summer while I was in school. I was a senior. I had one quarter left before I graduated. So I was really lucky that worked out. I made a ton of friends in my internship. It was a really awesome and really intense experience. Then I went back to Seattle. I finished up at the University of Washington. I graduated and I just applied for jobs. Honestly, for a while, I was like constantly applying and I was trying to get jobs in production or in art or in development or just anywhere that I could kind of get my foot in. I ended up getting my first job out of school as a development trainee at Sony.
I remember this story. Yes.
That did not end up being the best job in the sense that like they really didn't need me to be there. I figured out pretty soon after I started that they just wanted somebody to be there like every once in a while to help answer the phones when the assistants whose job that really was were busy. It turned out that I was terrible at that. Like
Oh.
that same like nervous introverted artist that's not a natural at networking is not natural at like picking up the phone for like 4 different executives. I would like mispronounce their names and like
So nerve-wracking.
pat people into the wrong lines and like drop international calls. And I did not do a good job, but I did meet a few people while I was there who were like directors on their feature films there and storyboard artists. And some of them were really encouraging. Some of them were less encouraging, but still gave me good advice about how to improve my drawing. And it was a really stressful time too, because I was making like $10 an hour below
What?
minimum wage.
Yeah, for California, that's really bad.
It was really rough. And my wife was doing her master's degree at the time. The nice thing about this job is what gave me kind of the impetus to actually move to Los Angeles. And I don't know if things are going to be different post COVID, but at the time it was like really almost impossible to get a job in animation unless you lived in Los Angeles. So that job took me to Los Angeles. I was able to do some freelance animation work, and that freelance animation work ended up leading me to my first like industry artist job, which was as a storyboard revisionist at Titmouse Animation. And I actually got that job recommended. I was recommended by a friend I had made while I was in an intern at Nickelodeon. And he was somebody who I really felt like I forged like again, like I found the networking thing to be difficult, but he was somebody who I felt was like a real friend, you know? And
Mhm.
so just for other people maybe who find networking to be sort of a scary thing, I would say like my experience is like depth matters more than like quantity, you know? Because this was somebody who like I felt like I had a real relationship with and a real friendship with. So he ended up recommending me for my first job at Titmouse. And if you don't know Titmouse, they've worked on stuff for Adult Swim, Netflix, Disney, DreamWorks, just everything. And they're a really cool they're like the biggest indie studio in Los Angeles. And then I ended up working at Titmouse for like 3 years doing storyboard revisions. And then I moved into storyboards. And that's kind of the story of how I got in.
We started talking, you were on Mau Mau at the time.
Yeah.
Kind of piggybacking off that last question, since you mentioned how one opportunity led to the other and knowing people allowed you to flex those different skill sets, aside from boarding, did you ever get to implement your music in other areas other than animation as well?
Yeah, totally. I feel like, as a storyboard artist, one of the things you get to do sometimes, and for some people, it's something you have to do. Like some people like it and some people don't, which is pitching your storyboards. And because I had a lot of experience actually just doing live performances, I found pitching to be really fun and really gratifying. It's where you basically step through your board and you kind of give a performance like you do the voices and sound effects and you try to give the impression of what watching the cartoon will really be like. So that's something where it's like, and just having the experience of kind of knowing what is entertaining to people or what's not was really beneficial. But I also have had the opportunity, like working on Mau Mau, I wrote a few songs that ended up on the show. I think I wrote one song for Arlo, which was a project I worked on at Netflix. That was a really awesome musical comedy. It's been really amazing that I've had to have those kind of opportunities. To some extent, when I decided I needed to commit to like art, I felt like I was leaving music behind, you know?
Oh,
But it's given me more opportunities to do music in like a professional context than I think I would have ever had if I had just pursued music. So it's been a really cool thing. And definitely for people who are like multi hyphenates or have different skill sets, like whatever skill set you have, I feel you can bring to animation because it's really an all encompassing kind of art form. There's music, painting, drawing, writing, acting, like all of these things are elements of what go into creating animation.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that for sure. I know you've kind of gone a little bit in depth, but can you kind of describe what your day to day looks like as a board artist? Like, what's a day in the life of a storyboard artist?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on like what part of this cycle you're in. So basically, storyboards are usually on like a 5 or 6 week cycle in TV animation, at least, which is where I've mostly worked. So like right now, I'm working on a new Transformers show at Nickelodeon. This is a script-driven show, which means that all the dialogue, all the action is written out in a script, and our job is really to visualize it. And we have 6 weeks from kind of the beginning of when we're given that to when we're done. And so at the beginning, a lot of what I do is not drawing, it's thinking. I read through the script a few times. I mark things where like I have an idea, or I try to understand really the subtext, like not just what's written on the page, but like the purpose of like what's being written. Like what are they really trying to say with the story? What is this character's emotion that maybe isn't being stated overtly, but maybe could come through in the visuals, things like that. So that's maybe the first like 2, maybe even like 3 days I spend doing that. And then I start trying to visualize things on the most basic level. Like I do these little tiny thumbnail drawings that are like, how do you make a rectangle?
Like
That big.
this.
Really little things that like nobody else could even possibly decipher if they saw them, because it's just for me. The challenge with storyboarding is it requires a lot of different skill sets and like parts of the puzzle to put together. So what I try to do is break down my process into simple steps rather than trying to do everything all at once, which is kind of a Herculean task, So I first think about it, then I do these little crappy teeny tiny drawings, and then I think about those. And I'm like, is this going to tell the story that I need to tell? And I'll edit them and I'll take some out and I'll add new ones in. And then I go over and I start to clean those up. And by clean up, I mean as loose as I can get away with still, to communicate to other people. Because at this point, I have about 2.5 weeks left to get these ready to show to our executives and sometimes studio executives and people who are going to have a lot of notes to give. And so I want them to understand the story that I'm trying to tell and the emotion I'm trying to convey, and to think, yes, he's making good creative choices. I think we don't need to give this guy a ton of notes. Like that's my hope.
Okay.
So I want to try to sell my ideas to those people, and then they give the notes, and then I have to address the notes, and then I have about 3 weeks to clean up. And cleanup is just like drawing every day, just drawing. So that's kind of my process.
So you kind of answered two questions in one for me right there. But yeah, that's kind of like the process. You would say it's like thumbnails, and then you kind of shorthand it a little bit. So you kind of
Yeah.
not getting too detailed, but you can kind of tell the characters apart in the panels, and then you kind of clean it up. Yeah. You briefly touched up on a script driven series. So can you kind of describe the difference between script driven versus board driven?
Sure, yeah. So right now I'm working on a script-driven series where like the writers make a lot of the creative choices and the storyboard artists are more responsible for the visual choices. Most of my career has actually been spent on storyboard-driven shows so far. And it's a little bit less common these days for storyboard-driven shows, but it's the more traditional way that cartoons were made. It was kind of pioneered by Walt Disney and like those people way back in the day of saying, this is a visual story we're trying to tell. So we're going to have visual artists coming up with the story and writing it. And basically, the difference between script driven and storyboard driven is that storyboard artists on storyboard driven shows are also writers. And so on a storyboard driven show, rather than like 10 pages of a script that I need to visualize, I'll get like 1 page that's just a kind of a broad outline. And then my job is to break that down into beats, to actually write the dialogue, come up with all the jokes, really try to make the scenes work, try to make sure that whatever I'm doing sticks to the basic premise of the story that I've been given, And then that's a challenge for a lot of people, is that it's really easy to actually deviate from whatever you've been given, but you have to stick to it and try to be creative within that framework you've been given. And I really love working on storyboard driven shows. It's like, I don't know, I feel like I have so much creative freedom on something like that, and I'm just firing on all cylinders. It's really fun, and it can be really exhausting as well.
Yeah, I guess you can say that that's like the pros and cons of it, because when it's board driven, you do have a lot more creative liberties there, as opposed to a script already kind of having set in stone what you have to draw. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And so like the challenge with board driven is sometimes you write something and then you draw it and then you show it to your bosses and they don't like what you've written. So you have to rewrite it and redraw it, as opposed
Yeah.
to like a script driven thing. They've already approved the writing. That's not going to change, you know? So that can sometimes create a lot more work, and
It has its pros and cons, like pretty
exactly, it
much.
has its pros and cons. For me, the cartoons that I love to watch are usually storyboard driven, and I feel like you get a really strong like individual voice like of an artist that way, where you can tell like, oh, I can tell who wrote that joke because that's the kind of drawing they do or whatever, you know. Sometimes you can tell those things, and it's really fun.
Little piece of everybody in there. It's always fun. So, this next one, I'm not sure because you said you mostly have experience in television. So, to the best of your ability, how would you describe the difference between boarding for television versus feature?
Yeah, so I did actually spend about 6 months storyboarding on Arlo the Alligator Boy was a feature for Netflix, and then there was the series that followed I Love Arlo. And Arlo the Alligator Boy, the feature, is kind of, you know, in a sense, it's almost hybrid between like feature style and TV style. Like I don't think it has the full-on budget of like a Disney or Pixar kind of movie, but a big element of feature animation is that the budgets are usually bigger and you have more time to play with things. TV is kind of like you have to get in and execute, you have to do it right. There's a limited number of times that they can give notes on something because it just has to move on. The pipeline is going. So, in a way, TV can be more demanding. Feature, on the other hand, feels more like as a storyboard artist, you're like an idea machine. And so you go and they'll give you something, they'll be like, here's 3 pages, see what you can do with it. It's almost hybrid between storyboard driven and script driven because you have the creative liberty to change things in the script a lot of times or try things out. They won't necessarily go for it, but you're encouraged to play with it, to experiment. You kind of throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And so that can be really cool and creatively fulfilling. A lot of times the time deadlines are not as strict, so you have more time to really play with things. The downside is you might put a lot of effort into something and they're just like, it's good, but it's not right. We're going to give it to someone else and they'll take a shot at it, you know, and then that person will do it and then they'll say, yeah, well, okay, we're going to pass that on to someone else and maybe they'll take a crack at it. And so the same scene might get reworked a bunch of times by different people. It can be a little bit harder sometimes to see yourself in the final product because the final product is so big. And sometimes like the slowness of the pace, if you're like for me, I was used to TV in a really breakneck pace. And so if I had a few days where I didn't have a ton of work to do on a feature project, I'd question the meaning of my life, you know?
Oh, no.
I like to keep busy. So
Same.
um, there's ups and downsides to that as well. And some people love feature. And it's yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. And I'm interested in doing more feature work if I had the opportunity to. Feature, you get to have like there's a little bit of everything typically. It's emotional, it's funny, there's cinematic shots, like there's a little bit of everything. Whereas like a lot of shows only have like one of those things.
Especially with the genre, because usually comedy is a little bit more flat. You know, you have your poses
Yeah.
mostly in like the 3/4, not a lot of backgrounds. Yeah,
In TV, you really need to be concerned with like economy, being like, we need to reuse the existing backgrounds. We can't generate anything new.
yes. And another point that you made earlier, like one of the hardest parts about it too is not getting married to any ideas because things can get tossed out, and that's the hardest part too.
That can be tough sometimes. I've had experiences where like I worked on. I remember one time on Arlo. I'll just preface this by saying like I loved working on that show and the people I worked with were amazing. But one time they gave me a sequence and they were like, "We want you to kind of like punch up this chase sequence. Like it's feeling a little flat and cartoony. We want to make it cool and exciting." And I was like, "When do you need it done by?" And they were like, "Well, it's no rush, just like 3 weeks." And so I was like, "Okay," and I went for it. And I was like, this is going to be the craziest, most intense chase sequence. Like, and they got it and they were like, this is awesome. We can't use any of this.
No.
I think I think they actually did use like a single shot
Oh my
that I
gosh.
put in there. And I was just like a little bit heartbroken, but I was like, you know what? I'll keep it for my portfolio. Honestly, it was a cool experience. I feel like I really got to stretch and grow a lot on that show because I had time to really think about things and experiment with things.
I'm curious, which chase scene was it? Which one?
So it's like Arlo and Birdie are like riding on this train, right? And then suddenly the train stops in the middle of the forest, and they're like, "That's weird." And then the two like villains in the show, Ruff and Stucky, come up and they're looking for them in all the box cars, and then they see them and they're getting away, and then they run after them, and then so it was kind of like that point in the movie. It was like a chase
Okay.
through the woods in the night, and I had like all this stuff with like the dogs sniffing at their tracks and like
Ooh.
really crazy dramatic shots with like backlit by the moon and like just made it really kind of spooky and intense and like yeah, and they were like, yeah, it's too long.
Oh.
It's way too long. That's okay.
Well, hopefully that makes it into deleted scenes or somewhere. That'd be really cool to watch. Since we're kind of on the topic of Arlo, that'll bring me to my next question. What can you tell us about the process behind timing out boards for musical sequences? Like, how different is it to regular boarding?
Timing storyboards out to music, like one thing is it can be really demanding because suddenly you find yourself like hitting every little beat of the music, you know? So you might end up doing a lot more drawing than you normally would. But I think for a lot of people, timing to music is like a really effective strategy. Like I remember one time when I was working on Mau Mau, which also had a lot of musical sequences, the show creator was talking. He was like, yeah, and if you guys do a musical sequence here, like we almost never give any notes on the musical sequences. They always turn out awesome. Because I think when you have that structure that the song creates for you, you kind of intuitively know what to do. In some respects, for a lot of people, that seems to be the case. It can kind of really guide the creative decisions that you make. The general rule, and I think this is true in musical sequences and not in musical sequences as well, is like start with the big ideas, like what's the really cool shot you want to see, and you know, like what's the big composition before you get into the nitty-gritty details of acting and like what dance move they do on a particular beat of the song. Because if if you don't already know what the shots are going to be, then those dance moves are probably going to end up getting changed anyways. So that's kind of my advice on that. But I don't know, it's a thing too where different people work differently. Like my friend Emily Etzel, cool artist, I recommend checking her out. She's somebody who's really, really good at like doing a first pass and then editing, rearranging things completely, moving this over here, you know. Whereas like the way I work, I try to plan out from the beginning and I have a very hard time deviating from that once I know what I want to do. So different people work differently, you know. Some people are really good about like editing. And I think that works really well for like music video style music sequences, because I think music videos, like non-animated music videos, are often made by filming a lot of footage and then chopping it up and figuring out where you want to place it.
Kind of like B-roll footage, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So like that's one way that you can approach it. You can think about what are all these cool shots, and then you can place them in the song and time it out so that it works. Or you can kind of really focus on like what's the narrative through line that I want to tell and come up with it that way, if that makes sense.
Another thing I was curious about, you're typically given the song first, right? Like, is it usually a rough demo or a finalized version of the song you listen to, and then you kind of figure out the boards from there?
Yeah, yeah. So especially on Arlo, like our show creator Ryan Krigo is like a songwriter, and he and his songwriting partner wrote all of the music for the show. Sometimes the lyrics wouldn't be totally done, or it would be like, you know, a very rough demo. But yeah, we always had something to go on before we started storyboarding the musical sequence on that show. Um, on like on Mau Mau, on the other hand, that's one where I wrote more songs for it. And usually I wrote those songs, I just volunteered. I was like, this would be a great place for a musical number.
Oh, that's
And
pretty
then
cool.
I would like write the song and put it in. And that creates a big time constraint because it's like you're already doing the normal work of storyboarding and writing and everything. And now you have to write the song, get it done, so that then you can storyboard to it. So that was an additional challenge for sure.
Even more so because the episodes on Mama were only 11 minutes long. And if a song lasts, like, let's say 2 to 3 minutes, that's already like a third or fourth of the episode just in the musical sequence alone. So that can get really tricky.
For that show, because it was like 11-minute episode, I think we found that the shorter sequences tended to fit better. The longer sequences, you'd be like, this is kind of dragging.
That's pretty cool. Well, I guess going off of that, what is your favorite aspect of being a storyboard artist?
I mean, I love just any time when I can do something creative where I feel like I'm like getting to express something real, from within myself, whether that's something that I've written, and getting to do that is something I really love and I want to pursue more writing opportunities. Or sometimes it's just like really putting a lot of effort into how the characters act and like getting those facial expressions just right. Another thing that I really love about the experiences I've had is the collaborative aspect of it. Like I was saying earlier, like when I was in a band in like middle school and high school, like that was like my whole social life. And so having that as an adult where I can be like feel like I have these really significant like creative relationships where we're all working together with this kind of unifying purpose to create something that's as cool as we can make it. That's really fulfilling. You feel really close to the people that you do that kind of thing with.
That's one of the things I love about animation too, and just moving out here. Like, I really hope to meet other creative people because I love being a part of something and just being on a team. Especially now, if you're working remotely, being alone in your house can be really tough. So,
Yeah, and that has been tough.
last but not least, what are some final words of advice that you'd like to give to any aspiring storyboard artists?
You know, storyboarding is something that takes a lot of different skills. You're like a cinematographer, a director, an artist, a designer, an animator, an actor, sometimes a writer, sometimes a musician. It can be a lot of different things to focus on. One thing that I personally found pushed me towards this path was trying to make a big project, like trying to make my own animated short, trying to make my own musical comic book, or like those things where like I am kind of using all of those skills. I think that's why I wanted to become a storyboard artist, just so that I'd have an opportunity to do lots of different things, because that's what I really love doing creatively. Like I don't want to do just one thing all day every day. And then on the other hand, there were times when I had to step back and say, okay, I love doing big creative projects, but for the next few weeks or months, I really just need to focus on my figure drawing, or I really just need to focus on like, I need to take a storyboard class and learn how cinematography really works. And those were things that I didn't necessarily know that I didn't know until I butted up against them. But that's one thing you can learn if you're doing a big project, is you can then self-assess and say, okay, now what are my weak points? What do I need to work on? So that's been kind of my experience, and like the way I've kind of feel like I've gotten to where I am now.
If you have your own original story and characters, like just building upon that and drawing what you enjoy to kind of get a feel for boarding and explore that, you would say?
For me, that's the most motivating way to get into it, because you'll have tried a little bit of all those parts,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then you can say, what are the parts I really need to work on now if I want to be able to get a job? And you can get feedback from professionals who are working. You can find them online. Don't harass them. But a lot of people are open to give portfolio reviews and to give advice. I think that's a really valuable resource that's worth taking advantage of. Yeah.
That reminds me a little bit of what you said earlier about how you kind of started off that way too. Like sometimes you would send your portfolio out to people and being like, hey, like, can you take a look at my work? And that's kind of how we met. Like I
Yeah,
approached you and was like, hey, can you look at
absolutely.
my boards? And you were super
And
nice.
I was like really glad to hear from you. Like I'd never met you before or anything, but I was like, this is awesome. Like this is how I got my foot in the door and how I started to get to where I am now. And of course, I'm going to be happy to try to pay it forward to whoever's trying to come up now, and a lot of people feel that way. Also, you were super nice and super just like, I don't know, super humble, and asking for genuine advice, and not like, I've gotten other people who've reached out to me and were just like, hey, can I have a job? And I'm like,
Oh,
I can't give you a job. Like,
yeah.
I'm not hired personally. And also, I think you have some work to do.
That's the tricky thing about networking, especially with people who just haven't been shown how to do it properly, or just proper networking etiquette. It's like you said earlier, you want to build genuine connections with people and not just use someone as a step ladder.
Yeah, and because honestly, like, this sounds like it's just not as effective.
No, not at all, because
Like
people
it's just
see right
not going
through
to work
that.
for you. Like,
Yeah, nobody likes to feel used. So,
yeah, no, nobody likes to feel used, and probably you do need to work on your portfolio. Most people do. I do.
yes.
I still feel like, oh man, I really need to like work on my figure drawing. Oh man, I really need to work on my perspective drawing. Typically, the people who don't feel that way
Mm,
don't make it, you know,
yeah.
because you
I,
have to be driven to improve and you have to be
mhm.
sincere about looking for advice.
I feel like there's always room for improvement, right? No matter what level you're at, even if you've been working in the industry for several years and you're professional, there's always opportunity to learn something new, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was some pretty sound advice. But before we wrap up, where can our viewers find you on social media if they would like to connect with you?
I mainly use Instagram. Every once in a while, I go on Twitter, but Twitter stresses me out.
Yes,
Um,
that's fair to say.
my Instagram is Nathan but Nate. It's like nothing but net, except it's Nathan but Nate. So yeah, check me out there. I don't post a lot, but I'm like one day I'm gonna start posting more. But I've got that, and I've also got nathanbutnate.net is my website where you can check out a lot of my personal projects. My music is on nathanbutnate.net. My animated short Waking the Giant is up there. Some of my old storyboard portfolio pieces are accessible on there. You can see the whole history. Some of my work from high school is on there. So I've got
Oh, wow.
the whole catalog. Um, if you really want to see the evolution of an artist.
Well, thank you so much for coming on
Yeah,
and taking the time to answer all my questions and share a little bit about your experience.
of course. Thanks for having me on, Jaden. It's been super fun.
And thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up. I have more interviews lined up in the near future, so remember to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you can stay tuned. And I will see you all next time. Bye!